There's been quite a bit of success for the Houston Texans so far under DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud. What can they accomplish in 2025? We're breaking that down today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, and welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate you all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins.
Joe, happy Thursday to you. Happy working hard on the grill day to you.
What are you cooking, man? Real quick, what are you cooking?
We'll probably do steak, burger, chicken.
That's
a little bit of everything.
Too. Yeah, no, I'm into this now. Like, you don't just cook one thing; you cook like three things. I'm into that.
Yeah,
have a side of meat with your meat. You know?
Heaven forbid you have leftovers of like stuff on the grill. You know, like
that's better than ticket, man. 2 or 3 days of eating on that.
Yeah,
big fan. Sounds like you're doing it right.
It's like meal prep. We're doing elaborate holiday meal prep.
Dig it.
So Texans today on the show.
It's Texans Day on the show, Kyle. It's the last one. After today, we will have dissected all 32 rosters across the NFL, and we have examined these teams. We studied these teams, and we put every player into different buckets. Those buckets are roster cornerstone, quality starter, a rookie, a sufficient starter, a replacement level, quality depth, non-roster caliber, incomplete evaluation, and a practice squad developmental player. Every bucket is worth a different point value. Every position is weighted differently based on importance. And after today and throughout next week, we are going to be really sharing how the scoring came out and which units are the best and which rosters are the best. So it's Houston's Day in the sun. We'll get into the back seven. We'll talk O-line, D-line, but we start with the offensive skill players around CJ Stroud.
A lot of new. I think that's the theme of the offense, right? A lot of new. Jayden Higgins, Christian Kirk, Jalen Knoll, Justin Watson, Braxton Berrios, Nick Chubb. A lot of new.
The coordinator, right? And it's
new
yeah, it's a lot of new. And you foil that against CJ Stroud and honestly, the success he's had for the first 2 years of his career. Yeah. And you know, they definitely made some choices here to pivot in a new direction. Obviously, we'll get into the defense. There's so much to love about the defense. But I am excited to see how this comes together around CJ Stroud, where Nico Collins has emerged as one of the premier wide receivers in the NFL. Height, weight, speed, demon. Just his ability to get loose down the field is just unbelievable. And it's very unfortunate, the Tank Dell injury and kind of the cloudy future that exists there, because obviously there was a special connection between him and Stroud, but they've certainly infused it with both of those Iowa State players and Higgins and Knoll. I love them both, man. I was a big Higgins guy, and just the idea of what Higgins can be with Collins, that's a problem, right? For what this passing game can be with CJ Stroud pulling the trigger. And you got Christian Kirk, who obviously injuries were an issue for him last year in Jacksonville, but he's not far away from being, a good player with a lot of verticality to his game. And, a lot to prove for him this year, and he's going to get that opportunity. And you still have Hutchinson and Mechie as guys that have flashed a little bit over the years as draft picks. So I think the cupboard's pretty full here. There's obviously some new pieces, right? It still is Nico Collins, and we have a lot to learn, but I think the talent is pretty abundant when it comes to this wide receiver core around CJ Stroud.
Yeah, it's your wide receiver 9. If Tank Dell was healthy and your wide receiver 9 was either Hutchinson, Mechie, Watson, or Berrios, however you shake that group out,
that's nuts.
that's a good place to be as far as getting the right combination of names. And you mentioned Nico and the explosiveness that he brings with the size and Higgins as a size player to potentially play outside of that. I look at the rest of these guys, whether it's Kirk or a healthy Tank Dell, hopefully the recovery, you get to see him at 100% again, because that was obviously a really ugly injury that he suffered last year. But Noel and how he knows to play off of Higgins, Mechie with that skill set, like you've got guys that are going to have a lot of space to operate off of those two big-bodied players that exist on the outside. And I think that's a really exciting combination. Nico Collins I have as a cornerstone. Christian Kirk I do have as a sufficient level starter. Higgins and Noel, rookies. Mechie I have as a quality depth player. Xavier Hutchinson I have as an incomplete evaluation. I would lean quality depth if we were going to put him in a bucket.
Yeah, I have it exactly the same. Except for I kept Mechie as incomplete, but you can convince me that there's a quality depth player already established there, especially when I think about the skill set and the player I watched coming out of Bama. So a lot to like there. Tight end, Dalton Schultz.
Real quick.
Okay.
Obviously, Tank Dell will be on the whatever injury designation list.
Mm-hmm.
Who doesn't make it?
What do we think the number is here? 5 or 6?
Give them 6 because they got the numbers to justify, I think, comfortably 6. That still leaves 2 guys on the outside. Like Braxton Berrios, I assume, will be one of the guys on the outside looking in. But who's the other name?
Okay, I think the guys that make it are Collins, Higgins, Noel, Kirk, Mechie, Hutchinson.
So you think both the free agent ads of Berrios and Watson don't make it?
I don't feel good about what I said.
But
I mean there's a special teams component that's going to matter.
Good problem to have.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty deep there too. Yeah, Dalton Schultz, sufficient starter, and some intriguing depth behind him. Cade Stover, I think, has a lot of upside. We'll see what he can do in year 2. Brevin Jordan made some flashes, right, with the yards after catch stuff that has followed him since his time at Miami, coming off of an injury. We'll see what he can offer. They draft Luke Lachey. It looks like a serviceable group, and I think Dalton Schultz is a player with something to prove this year. I think there's a little bit of doubt there, and I think there's been some really good chemistry at times between him and CJ Stroud, and so I'm not writing him off. It was interesting. I was listening to the Locked On Texans squad show, and they had a really interesting conversation about the tight ends, and every member of the panel was like in on a different guy as the one that can be the answer there. And I think that speaks to some good competition. It speaks to some youth, and then obviously a veteran here in Schultz. I think it's a pretty good situation.
Yeah, and obviously the long-term play that exists with, you could tell me down the line Stover and Lachey is a 1-2 combo of tight ends, and I'd be like, okay,
sure.
It's not gonna be a world-beating group, but man, you get a pretty sturdy 1-2 punch of skill sets, and Schultz is a really savvy and productive underneath player. I think that's the part where you know what you're gonna get, where his targets have value. It's, again, soft coverage and underneath and finding holes in zones and making yourself very friendly and available to the quarterback. I have no reason to think with the matchup problems Houston can create on the outside that Schultz will not continue, if he continues to hold down the majority of the snaps, be a friendly target for CJ Stroud. Now, the running game, what they did this offseason at running back was pretty interesting, where
I'd say
you have pre-existing Joe Mixon. You bring in Nick Chubb. You trade up for Woody Marks. And I believe they Thanos snapped that draft pick. That they pulled that out of nowhere. They traded a future pick to get that pick, I believe. So Mixon, Chubb, significant draft investment in Woody Marks. Then you've got Dameon Pierce, who hasn't lived up to kind of the early career flashes.
I watched Week 18 against Tennessee, and what do you have, like 180 yards? Was reminded that he could still go a little bit.
Somebody trade for him. Free this man.
Right. Get him in a spot where he can play.
Dario Gumbawale, not a very sexy player, but I think if he was your fourth running back and a special teams kind of guy,
Sure.
like you feel good about him in that kind of role. And then JJ Taylor is a young guy who has some juice, is undersized, but has a lot of juice. I mean, there's names here, Joe.
Yeah, and they traded for and extended Joe Mixon, who turns 29 later this month. It definitely feels like they're giving themselves options. And boy, like, who knows what to expect from Nick Chubb? There was certainly a point in time where I thought he was the best pure runner in the NFL. Now, obviously, a couple of years of injuries, you wonder where he's at, but he's not asked to come in here and touch the ball 300 plus times. And Marks gives them a pass catching element, which obviously Joe Mixon can give them as well. But I thought this team was at its best last year when the run game was cooking. And Joe Mixon did have some really good production at times. And now there's a deeper stable of backs, right? If it wasn't Mixon, you just didn't feel like Pierce was going to get it done. And then it was Ogunbowale. You've elevated that room. It's just a matter of how it's spread out in terms of the load. But I think this rushing game, in terms of the backs, the stable of backs, it's definitely better this year than it was last year.
I'd be inclined to agree.
All right, the offensive line. That's been the biggest story. Yeah, boy, we'll share some thoughts on that here next. So, folks, be sure to stick with us. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. I love checking out the app in the morning and seeing what profit boosts exist for me. And I checked out the app this morning, and there is some very tasty stuff regarding the Houston Texans. How about this? You think the Texans are going to win this division? I do. You can get that at plus 110 for the Texans to win the AFC South. That's a good payout. How about this one? You think they win 10 games? I do. The over, you can get the over of 9.5 wins at plus 105. You think CJ Stroud throws for 4,000 yards? You can get that at plus 135. So some really good opportunities here for some Texans props. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5. You get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started.
Tasty indeed, Joe Marino.
Well,
like that last one too. Plus 135 on 4,000.
Yeah, that was one of my favorites. You and I have been talking AFC South all week, and part of our behind the scenes conversations has been looking at some schedule stuff. And kind of, like the interdivision stuff doesn't look super daunting, but the non-division games pretty challenging here for this division. And like you would say, oh, this team's going to hit the over on this win total. And then you go through the schedule and you're like, man, there's some tough roads here.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Well, it's going to mean your ability to have a well-developed offensive line is going to be important for you getting to where you want to go. And there's 6 prominent new names for the Houston Texans offensive line this year. And not all of them projected to start, obviously, but Cam Robinson, Laken Tomlinson, Jake Andrews, excuse me. Jake Matthews would be a great ad. Ed Ingram, Trent Brown, Ariante Ursary. That is not the projected lineup. That is just the new names brought into the offensive line this offseason.
Well, you got to feel like Cam Robinson with a 1-year, $12 million deal that has 4 void years attached to it. And they're going to be paying this guy, committing a lot of cap space next year for him to be around in this 1-year deal. To me, he's the player with so much to prove and has a lot of pressure here. It's a guy that I think is
breathing down his neck too.
Yeah, he should. But the money, right? You follow the money a little bit. It kind of tells the story. That's the type of deal that you give him to come in and start for you. I think he's going to be their left tackle. We're thinking Tytus Howard and Laken Tomlinson, the likely starters at guard.
Yeah.
I think Jarrett Patterson feels like the leader at center, but Juice Scruggs might have something to say about that. Jake Andrews might have something to say about that. Well, yeah, Blake Fisher versus Trent Brown for the right tackle job. That's the one thing I can say is I don't know that I love every name that exists here, but I do love that there's legitimate competition for every spot, and that should bring out the best in these players.
have you kept up at all with what Tytus Howard has been exposed to as far as how little opportunity he's had to settle into a spot?
No, yeah, he's somewhere different all the time, even within the same season.
He said this spring, getting these reps in, probably the first time I've had a chance to get this many reps at guard before the season started. In his career,
he's gonna play guard for them, right?
Let the man play a single spot. You've got all these other names now. There's unquestioned value in position versatility, but in his career, he's played 245 snaps at left tackle, 1,428 snaps at left guard, 3 snaps at right guard, which is now where he's going to play this year. And then it's an additional 2,960 snaps at right tackle. So he's got 4,500 snaps between left guard and right tackle, but whenever there's been an interruption, he's always the guy that's had to move.
Yeah, that brings a lot of value to the team, but it also is detrimental to you just kind of settling into one spot. And it's a hard foil between like, hey, you're our this position and that's what you do for us, versus, man, it's always fluid, man, especially with the offensive line. And we've had complimentary things to say about some of the offensive lines we've talked about recently, where, there's so many opportunities to move guys around to get your best 5 out there. And if one guy goes down, you can figure it out. And Tytus Howard's been a figure it out the guy, but you'd love to see him get a chance to settle in at one spot.
Do you see this with this unit though?
Wow.
So like Cam Robinson, I don't want to move Cam Robinson around.
No, because he's a left tackle, but I
don't want to move Laken Tomlinson around. I don't think Jared Patterson could hold up at guard.
I tend to agree.
So I think you have Juice Scruggs potentially as a util guy. I think Ursary could play inside if he had to, but I would assume he's better at tackle.
And he's the guy that needs to stay at one spot with the necessity to develop a lot of technique. Physically, he's unbelievable.
Second round draft choice. There's a big investment there.
Yeah.
And Cam Robinson, as you mentioned, you can offset some of the dead money for the void years with Cam Robinson if Ursary steps into the left tackle job next year.
Need it.
Howard has obvious flexibility. I don't think Ingram has a lot of attractive flex. Jake Andrews does, but like the ceiling there's not very high.
Yeah, New England moved on pretty quick.
Or the floor is not very high there either at this stage for Andrews. How many do you think they keep?
I would think.
Do you think they just keep the 10 and hoard the whole group?
Well, I think they'll keep at least 9. And then,
yeah, but if they keep 9, who would be your one that doesn't make it out of this group?
Add Ingram or Jake Andrews.
Because Scruggs can play center, it would probably be Andrews for me. Would be the one that I would cut out of this 10. If you were to go to 9.
Assuming everyone's healthy, yeah.
How do you have it graded?
Lord God. Okay. Cam Robinson and Trent Brown I have as quality depth players. I have Laken Tomlinson and Tytus Howard as sufficient starters. I have Fisher, Patterson, Andrews, and Scruggs as incomplete, and I have Ursary as a rookie, and I have Ed Ingram as a replacement level.
Okay. A few subtle differences, but generally in the same ballpark here. We're going to have to offline about it a little bit, but I have Cam Robinson, Laken Tomlinson, Trent Brown, all as quality depth players. Howard I have as a sufficient level starter. Fisher, I thought, showed some nice stuff as a second-round pick when he had a chance to play last year. Obviously, an incomplete evaluation there. Incomplete evaluation on Patterson, Ursary, rookie. I also have Ed Ingram as a replacement level player.
So the only one we're different on was Tomlinson. You had quality depth, and I said sufficient starter.
Yeah.
Well, Kyle, we did it again. We didn't get to the defensive line, which we're supposed to do in this segment. So it's all defense in segment 3. And, of course, we'll talk about the rookie long snapper as well. So, folks, be sure to stick with us.
Brinkman.
I promise we talk about him.
Let's skip the defense. Let's just talk Austin Brinkman.
Hey, got a couple of quality players here in Fairburn and Townsend as your kicker and punter. I mean, you got to adapt to a new long snapper.
All right. Defensive side of the football. Let's start with the defensive front. Really like what they have from an edge perspective with Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter, who got re-upped. I think currently second highest paid edge on an annual average salary basis. He snuck in front of, who was it? It was Crosby, and I think there was one other one he snuck in front of that recently got done. But then you have Danico Autry. You have Darrell Taylor coming over from Chicago. I like that 1 through 4 quite a bit. Autry can still go as your reduce inside nightmare for guards who can't handle power type of player, because he's a little bit more twitched up than some of your other interior guys. And I think that's what stands out when I look at the rest of the interior, the Tim Settles of the world, the Fali Fatukasis of the world, Sheldon Rankins at this stage of his career. I don't see twitch, which makes the Nico Autry like a really important player for their rush fronts.
Derek Barnett's here too. I think this is the best 1 through 5 defensive end group in the league.
Ooh, that's a take.
Hunter, Anderson, Autry, Taylor, Bennett, 1 through 5. I think that's freaking good. I have Anderson and Hunter as cornerstones, and
then you have Mario Edwards, who can technically play some.
He's
base end too.
Okay. I don't want to make this a Bills conversation, but their direction here with a lot of like penetration style players, I can kind of see some parallels.
Feels like that.
Oh, there's somebody else is doing this. You know what I mean? And this is obviously a really good defense that actually has been able to compete against Kansas City in the postseason even if they haven't beaten them. So,
2 cornerstone edge players.
Yes.
Anderson and Hunter.
Yeah, and Anderson's playoff run, that's what convinced me that, like, oh yeah, this is a quality start, or not just a quality start. It's not a cornerstone. Yeah.
He's making the leap that you would hope that a guy in year 2 as a top draft choice is making.
Yes.
Autry, I still have as a sufficient level starter for Autry. Now, I know that's not necessarily the role that he will have in this front, but I wanted to give him a starting label to quantify his value.
Yeah, I probably should have too. I think I leaned into what you said there, is that he's technically a quality depth player. So that's kind of what I labeled him. But if you told me Danico Autry was a starter for you, I would definitely say he's a sufficient level starter.
When we do the bookkeeping,
yeah, that's fair.
Come to my side on that one. I'll meet you on the offensive line, and I'll trade you that 1 for 1.
So let's talk interior, though, a little bit more. Fatukasi coming off of a significant injury. Sheldon Rankins, boy, I worry that there's anything left in the tank there.
I have him as a replacement level player based off what he was last year.
I think that's extremely fair. So then you have Tim Settle, who like definitely had his best season, and Mario Edwards. So I'm a little concerned about this interior based on the unknowns with Fatukasi and the trajectory of Rankins. I think that could be a bit of an issue here.
Here's where I find some solace with it is I do look at, obviously we like the edge group the way that it is. And I think the early down guys being Fatukasi coming off the injury and Tim Settle, you kind of know they're going to keep these linebackers that can run clean, right? It's like they're big bodies. They're not necessarily true nose tackle types, but they're not like penetration 3 techs like Sheldon Rankins used to be, as a guy who could play a 5-4-3 alignment and really shoot gaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
I look at the guys that are pushing for like the sub package opportunities. I like Keontae Hamilton coming out of Rutgers. Now, did I like him to think, hey, he needs to play 400 snaps his rookie season? No. I like Junior Tafuna as an undersized, undrafted free agent from this year's class out of Utah. I mean, he was awesome at the Senior Bowl. So I think they have a couple role players that either they make the 53, or if they don't make the 53, maybe they're stashed as practice squad guys who maybe throughout the season can come on a little bit and at least give you some help with Autry, who can rush inside as well. And, you know, if you're going to play exotic front games and you want to get 3 of these edge rushers on the field, and then Autry, if you told me that was your rush front, it was Anderson, Hunter, Autry, and
Settle or William Edwards is probably their next best.
Yeah, right? probably Edwards, or like in the back half of the season, if Keontae Hamilton develops, maybe that's that player. Like, I think you have plenty of juice to win without blitzing if you wanted to in that regard.
Yeah.
So it's not a sexy group on the interior. I would still like it a lot more if you had like that all around presence to kind of just offset. Teams are probably going to come out and throw the ball on 1st and 10, right? It's like we want to throw the extra direction. We're going to slide the protection to one guy and then double team the other guy and ask Tim Settle or Fali Fatukasi to win a one-on-one pass rush matchup.
Right. Linebacker?
Christian Harris.
Little concern. Okay, so Christian Harris, I'm very curious where this is going, right? Because he missed time, that he came back for like the playoffs and got hurt, played like 8 snaps in the playoffs, and he hasn't practiced yet. There's hopeful to be back for training camp, and then you see that happen with him, and then they also signed EJ Speed.
Yeah, I mean they brought in a couple of guys that at worst I think should be really good special teams players for them, with Nick Neiman too being the other name.
Yeah.
But Speed coming over, I mean, even if it's Speed and Al-Shaair,
that's good. That's a good tandem. Yeah.
Now, Christian Harris, I think, showed some leaps, and I think that's what's disheartening with the injury stuff that he went through last year. But Al-Shaair, dude, just play within the whistle, and we're going to be in great shape. He's an impactful player when he just plays smart.
He never really had that reputation, though, Yeah. Or maybe I'm just missing something. I've never really remembered that being true for Shaair, but of course last year got goofy. And To'o is not like the most dynamic physical presence, but he's really smart. And I think dude is like as a depth linebacker that you feel like can come in and help, and he has done that. I think he's really good for that type of role.
And
I just want to know where Christian Harris is really at, because he was really coming on, and what do you have? It was a hamstring and then something else as well. It was a calf. It was a calf injury.
How about bringing in CJ Johnson and Jalen Reed into this safety room that already had Kalen Bullock was outstanding last year as a coverage player.
Yep.
There's Jalen Petrie, obviously. Jimmy Ward had some legal stuff in the last couple weeks, so that's something to monitor. But you got an embarrassment of guys that we just had this conversation the other day about guys who can play safety / linebacker and play in the apex and play in the nick.
Guys.
Gardner-Johnson and Petrie, those two guys alone. And then you see what Jalen Reed did at Penn State. This past year, Jimmy Ward's entire career was built off of being that kind of versatile safety player. And then you got a guy in Bullock on the back end who can be the quarterback of the whole thing and tie all the coverage strings together because he's got such good eyes and feel for zone coverage.
I mean, you could even talk about Miles Bryant and MJ Stewart as those types of players as well. They're not nearly the appealing guys that we just went through, but they want to have as many of those types as they can. It certainly feels like. For a pass, I mean, I thought this was maybe the best pass defense in the league last year. I think it might be again this year.
You go through the quarterbacks and their performances versus Houston.
I don't really want to talk about that, but
I mean, listen, through three picks, week 15 or whatever it was.
Would you rather throw 3 picks or go 10 of 30 for like 90 yards or whatever Josh had?
Did you win the game?
No.
Okay, then I don't think it matters. What was the score of that game?
I think the Bills wound up making it close because Keon Coleman had some goofy play at the end, and I think Fairburn hit a big kick or something like that. But Josh was 10 of 33. I was like, what is this? Am I watching him against Nebraska back in Wyoming?
Did it go back to Wyoming, Josh?
Dude.
Lassiter's a dog.
Yes.
So, we got Derek Stingley, and Derek Stingley's got
cornerstone, super good. Yeah.
Cornerstone and all that outstanding former top 5 pick. You knew what you were getting if he was going to stay healthy. Congrats. Lassiter is a freaking dog, man. He's nasty.
Yeah, he's a really good all-around player. Like, whatever. He's not super fast. Okay. Watch him play.
The transitions are super fast.
Right. But wasn't his time speed not that good or something?
Just the eyes and the footwork and how quick he can transition to trigger on throws in front of his face. That's what makes it really horrifying with the combination of the pass rush guys that they have with speedy linebackers to kind of overlap in the middle. You got these guys that are just smothering in one-on-one on the perimeter outside the numbers. And then you have this smorgasbord of diverse safeties. Like, D'Amico gets it, and he's got the horses to make it happen again this year. I don't know that it could be hard to top what they did from like a defensive pass play EPA standpoint last year, but they should be very good defensively again in 2025.
It's going to be hard to replicate, but I think their personnel is better with the addition of CJ Gardner-Johnson. Lassiter and Bullock are no longer rookies.
Yeah, the leaps of those individual players. And then do you get Christian Harris? If you get Christian Harris healthy too, on top of that,
going up against all Daniel Jones and Cam Ward and Trevor Lawrence,
they might top it again.
Yeah, but in their defense, they also made some really good quarterbacks look pretty silly. So
yeah, they did. Anything else on Texans?
I think the only other thing is they do have a difficult schedule. I think they're
talking about Austin Brinkman some more.
We can if you'd like, but I think this is a class of the division. But I also recognize I think their schedule's tough. I do, and I think there's a lot that needs to come together on offense. Defensively, I think this team is going to be a juggernaut. Come together and go on a run, right?
Yourself.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team they've won a playoff game each of the last 2 years. They have to feel like they've kind of paid their dues a little bit, right? Looking for a big breakthrough this year in year 3 for Stroud and Ryans. And so I'm curious to see what this run looks like this year.
It should be a fun team. That's going to do it for us here. Locked on NFL Scouting. We're done for the week. We're going to take tomorrow with the holiday and do the scoring and assessment of all the rosters. So you will not hear from us tomorrow, but then we'll be back on Monday for a great week ahead to kind of get into some of the macro conversations around what we've done for the last 8 weeks. So we hope you will come back and see us on Monday. Kyle Crabbs, Joe Marino. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Make it a great weekend. We will talk to you all again on Monday.